two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is the
from WBRN Radio, Boston Red Network episode, The Monday Morning Quarterback. The date, the 31st of March, 2020. A production note here, we moved the Monday Morning Quarterback actually to Tuesday to give it an extended type of version here at WBRN Radio. So a little bit different, and that is to all of our episodes. They are timely. The information is timely. Certain events are onward moving, no doubt about that, given the pandemic. That is a worldwide pandemic, not only in the U.S., but all over the world. We'll cover it from several angles here, from the BBC, from the Washington Post had some articles here. We'll look at those. And also from the LA Times. So we're covering it from the East Coast, the West Coast, and in between as we run down several of the cities. The numbers will change some, but effectively that is what's going on. If you've been listening to the White House briefings and various other pundits out there, they're talking about modeling, and this is something we do quite a bit on the Boston Red Network with our partner Cranston Analytics. We look at models, we do models, we're constantly scraping data, big data as you'll call it, as it is called, and that is one of the things that we always look at. Some of the projections out there, this is the number of people that would be fatalities in this particular pandemic in the U.S., ranging from 100 to 200,000, and perhaps to 1.2 million. You hear those numbers. Those are just projections by the models, and the models themselves are based upon information that is rather sparse in itself. One of the unfortunate problems with modeling is the model is no better than the design of the data design and the data that is in the model. So that'll be ongoing, but you have something of a thumbnail based upon those models and how the federal government is moving. Now, new guidelines, and they're just guidelines. Now, the guidelines do not have the teeth of law. The governors of the individual states, i.e. California, that is Governor Newsom, Governor Cuomo in New York, are the ones that implement these particular guidelines. People are shuttered, or they are confined more or less by social agreement to their homes, if they have one, or to wherever they are. The problem here has been that the U.S. was ill-prepared, and at this instance, DJ Trump is running commercials that are nothing more than Disneyland. But the issues that are ongoing here, and Bernie Sanders has been making them known on Facebook, you can there, and Joe Lunchbox Biden to a lesser extent has been moving. Now, on the week that was, we looked at Karl Rove and his take on where the race was, where Joe Biden was. Joe Biden is a retail politician, an old line type politician in the mode of LBJ. but not with the force of personality of an LBJ. And this puts him at a disadvantage because, first of all, when you're the president, you can command the national networks to televise your reality shows, so to speak. Now, there are stations in places like Seattle that are not broadcasting this rendition. What has happened basically is when you come out there on a daily basis, you have very little to say. The last few days they've been talking about the models, Dr. Brooks, and also the from Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci from the CDC, talking about various instances. The latest thing is there's still debate over masks. Now, masks are commonly worn in China, in Singapore, and various other outlets in countries, and that was before the pandemic because of pollution and various other things. You don't see as many people in the U.S. Wearing masks. We, of course, have been wearing a mask on at various times back in January, basically for pollution there with heart problem, blockage problem, or whatever you want to call it, which brings about similar symptoms as you have with COVID-19. As such as at times breathing problems, but a different situation, sinus problem, digestive problems. You have them all rolled in to one, and they come and they go, depending obviously on certain climatical conditions, certain foods digested, etc. But the issue here is not that particularly. There are people with various respiratory illnesses that this COVID-19 could exacerbate, and many people have landed in hospital. But the current advice is, if you are experiencing these symptoms that I just talked about, to call a doctor or a hotline. They don't advise you to rush to the ER. What they basically tell you to do is to self-quarantine yourself, and if you get worse, then go to an ER, and they will give you a test if there's a testing station available. The ERs usually do have some type of test, and they will then test the person. Now, even after they have tested the person, and if they are COVID-19 active, we'll say, depending again on the severity, some people, they just send them home and they can check in later. If they are really having problems, then they will be assessed and put into the hospital. Now, this is an important situation there that the ventilators, you hear a lot about the ventilators. Only the more severe case are placed on ventilators there, and one number was, at least in Italy, that, and I believe also in China, that roughly 85% of the people that were placed on ventilators became casualties. Now, there are many, many people that have survived COVID-19. Most do. About 80%, the symptoms are not that bad. So that leaves about 20%, and it depends a lot on the demographic. But one of the things we are seeing, we'll get into it in a minute, as we get into the report from the Washington Post, and we'll talk a little about these cities. I think perhaps now is a good time to do this, so we'll go to some factual information here that is changing from day to day. It's not something that is forever there. It's one of the things that obviously that we are continually seeing. Now, we'll get to the Post here. Let me just throw my glasses on here. And this is from the Post, and there's several articles here, but I think I will do the border story. This is the Mexico-U.S. border. This is by Mary Beth Sheridan. It was on the 30th of March. This is the border between Mexico and the U.S. On this is Sunday. We had confirmed cases in California topped 6,200, compared with just 23 in Baja California. Arizona had 919 cases, dwarfing the 14 in neighboring Sonora. New Mexico reported 237 cases, not very many, and Chihuahua State there were only 6. Now, this border is one of the busiest U.S.-Mexico border. Million crossings per day, and of course the economies are intertwined. The disparity reflects in part a time lag. Mexico did not report its first case until the 27th of February, a month after the vaccine was detected in the U.S. To date, the country has counted 993 cases, less than 1% of the total in the U.S. Now, the testing regime in Mexico is different. Mexico is also pursuing what they call an unorthodox stratagem. It's relying less on tests and more on its disease modeling. And this is one of the things that every country basically has a model. The World Health Organization has a model also. In mid-March, many of the neighboring states in the Central America declared emergency. Mexico kept its airports, shops, and government offices open. The government didn't urge a broad stay-at-home project until last week. Mexico's approach amounts to a bet. That is from the czar, the Corona czar, a bet that's technically sound. This is from Hugo Lopez Gatell. As said in the interview, authorities are wagering that they can fine-tune their response to the virus, even as it has outwitted officials in the U.S. and in Europe. There is no one way of doing this. Mexico held off on harsh lockdown measures to allow citizens to work a few weeks, and the reason for that is the informal economy. Plumbers, gardeners, taco vendors, etc. have little or no savings, and that basically mirrors some of the gig workers within the U.S. Keeping those workers home when it's not absolutely necessary, Lopez Gatell said, could cause frightening damage. But it turns out Mexico waited too long to introduce restrictions. Mexico has half as many beds per capita as the U.S. There's no reason to doubt that. The system will be overloaded. Well, it's overloaded in New York now than in other countries. That is from Eduardo Lopez Paya, a former deputy health type that is now at the Medical Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington. Turmoil in Mexico typically generates fear of a spillover in the U.S. It's Mexicans who are worried about crossover problems, and on Saturday, governors of 3 states called on President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador to tighten controls and limit arrivals of the COVID-19 virus from the U.S. Now, Mexico has extensive experience with infectious diseases. It was the epicenter of the 2009 swine flu pandemic. But unlike many nations, it has not rushed to scale up testing. In Lopez Gatell, a respected epidemiologist with a doctorate from Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins has a map. We encourage you to go to that site, and you will see the incidences numbers there. They've been doing an excellent job of tracking. An institution that currently distinguishes itself with the website. And we'll put that up at bostonred.org. How deep is the undercount? Academic studies estimate 10 to 15 times as many common flu cases each year as reported. Well, that could be. But there's also an undercount in the U.S., probably of 10 times as many if you're talking about common flu cases, period. But the raw numbers aren't the point. What matters, he says, is identifying when and where the virus started. Grow expeditiously, no doubt. You don't interview 300 million Americans, he said. There's a scientific method of how to know what is the size of a sample needed for an accurate survey. There's no doubt about that. That is an established situation, and in many sites in public broadcasts will come up with more and more of how the testing is actually done, as we do here with political polling. We'll come up with some more evidence here. On the 24th of March, declared that the virus had moved to a new stage and was spreading unchecked in communities. Mexico has conducted about 65 tests per million inhabitants. That's compared with 2,550 per million in the U.S. Now, once again, the U.S. is about 3 times the size of Mexico, so you have to look at it in those sense. Mexico's approach varies drastically from much praised model of South Korea. South Korea is a state about the same size, but it has much better healthcare system. Carlos Della Rayo, epidemiologist at Emory University, says Mexico has moved too slowly. Well, we'll see how that all turns out as to how they have moved there, as though doing testing will solve the problem. That's not at all clear. That's from Samuel Ponce de Leon, an infectious disease specialist at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. No one has been able to replicate South Korea's success, no doubt about that. And in South Korea, the whole system is a little bit different. Is better organized to begin with, better healthcare system. More people have mobile devices, and they were able to track people there, and they have the infrastructure to do it. Whereas Mexico does not have the infrastructure. In fact, as it turns out, the U.S. doesn't have the infrastructure. Mexico so far has 20 deaths compared with 2,500. That has skyrocketed upward of the number of deaths now in the U.S. is 3,800 deaths there in the U.S. So it has went up from day to day. We have a different situation there. Let's just get to the politics part of this scenario here. This again is from the Post. We read over that. This is by Allison Parker and Josh. Anyway, announcing the country will remain shut down. We've already covered this. And DJ Trump cited the body bags outside of Queens Hospital. That's the Amherst Hospital near where he grew up, and those refrigerated trucks there. And he commented on that particular situation. Some administration officials also circulated Yahoo. YouGov, incidentally, is an internet poll showing that 59% of Americans believe opening up the country for business by Easter, as suggested by DJ Trump, was too soon. Two of the people said Trump has been pleased by how his approval ratings have ticked up recently. That's a strange phenomenon there, of how it is anyway. the president weighed in on the political implication of the virus when asked a question about the 2020 Democratic field. I've gotten great marks on what we've done with respect to this. He said, I've gotten great marks. Well, you notice he keeps saying, and even from almost every Democratic governor. So I have gotten great marks. Well, he's continually talking about how he's gotten great marks. But he's not the whole show. That's part of the problem there. Initially, of course, he downplayed the virus and talked about in terms of opening the country up in around Easter and before. And according to Kellyanne Conway and her spin, President presiding over a country's response to an anticipated, unprecedented pandemic of global proportion, and he's getting credit for his handling of the pandemic. Well, the problem here is that what Trump does, and based on what Dr. Birx and company advised there and various others, getting credit for a disorganized response. And this is the point that the Democrats have to make. This thing is just bungled and jumped into it. But what has happened here is the healthcare system in the U.S. is totally inadequate for what it should be. U.S. spends more money on the medical system, as far as the medical system, but the medical system itself virtually almost was non-existent. Many of the medical centers on the business models, that's to cut costs, did in fact cut costs, and because they cut costs, they don't have the resources now to do what they need to do. They also don't have the medical personnel. They're too busy training people in basic personnel. They moved away from the primary care physician to specializations. But the irony of this, many of the specialists, unless obviously you need a neurological procedure or heart procedure right away, elective surgeries have been postponed. So what that means is your medical centers are laying people off that are not involved in those processes, furloughing them, we should say. They'll be back. But this is one of the ironies of this whole medical system, and at the same time, medical systems are hiring. So you'll see that coming in. So in other words, it's a side of what is going on. And now they move to the Rose Garden. Fauci and Pence is unnecessary here. And we already talked about the models. But again, when you put out the raw numbers, you have to qualify that period. Now, this, did I say Amherst? It's Elmhurst. Elmhurst, excuse me. That's in Queens. And he talked about some friend that was older than him, a little heavier than him, went to hospital, and now he's in a coma, probably an induced coma, period. But this is the kind of information that is laid out to the public, and really when you get into something like this, there's very, very little you can do about it, and we'll see if we get some of the polling up. The polling is not going to tell you very much, because again, this is from real clear where the race is. People are really not looking at the race at this point in time, and this is why we tell progressives, as far as Bernie Sanders, the race is concerned, to stick around. This is from the Harvard-Harris kind of a disgraced poll run by Pinhead, what's his name there, was the manager of Hillary Clinton's 2008 Pinhead Penn, yeah, that was his name. Anyway, this is Biden and DJ Trump. Biden's up by 10 points, and Bernie's up by 6 points. And in New York, Biden is up by 20. This is a center poll in New York. Excuse me. This is Trump versus Biden. Biden's up by 25 points. The Democratic nomination, again, Biden is up by 26, according to Harvard-Harris. They have Trump's approval rating, and this is on Monday at 48. 52 disapproved of him. Rasmussen actually, and this is interesting because they outline a more favorable to DJ Trump at 45. So you can see how daunting Harvard-Harris is. And the approval rating of his handling is 50-50 according to Harvard Harris. And on Sunday, what do we have? The ABC Washington Post poll. This is a general election poll. Biden was up by 2. That's a margin of error there. And for the nomination, Biden's at 55. Bernie is at 39. 16 point there. And on Sunday, again, the general election there, Biden is up by 9 points. This is Fox News. So they're doing a little better. Even the ABC Washington Post has his approval ratings. DJ Trump's at 49. Fox News at 48. And congressional approval ratings only 33 and 54. I'm not sure why that is down. There have been explanations of it. And 51% of the people, according to Fox News, approve of his handling of the COVID-19 virus, whereas ABC and Washington Post is at 52% there. And in Michigan, all-important battleground state, Joe Lunchbox Biden and DJ Trump. Biden's up by 3, and Peters, we gave this before, is up by 7 over Mr. James, the Republican is running in Michigan as an African American. So that is the latest polling. So we'll run away now, and we'll come back to the BBC. Well, we'll go ahead and do it now while we're here. Millions will be left in poverty. That's according to the World Bank. This is more warning of substantial high risk amongst households, which depend on industries particularly vulnerable to the impact of the virus. And this includes tourism in Thailand, Pacific Islands, along with manufacturing in Vietnam and in Cambodia. You don't hear much about Vietnam in this mixture of people. The baseline scenario, 24 million fewer people will escape poverty across the region in 2020. On this worst-case scenario, the bank predicts 35 million would expect to remain in poverty, including 25 million in China. Defines poverty as living on $5.50 a day or less. A lot of seniors in the U.S. live on about that, between $5 and $10 a day. World Bank predicts faster growth this year in developing East Asia and Pacific region will slow to 2.1. That's very optimistic baseline compared with 5.8 for 2019. Totally different situation here. Now, this is China's official Purchase Management Index. PMI rose stronger than expected. This can happen. 52. 50 is the baseline. It had a record 35.7 in February, according to Julian Evers Pritchard, a senior China economist at Capital Economics, said the figure doesn't mean that the output was now back to its pre-virus. Well, no one is actually speaking of what it was before the pandemic, and it just simply would not happen. Period. The bank said the virus impact on the economy will see growth slow to 2.3 this year. It was 6.1, but if the pandemic doesn't get worse, and growth could be at 0.1% this year. I wouldn't look very much at that as to where it would go. Let's go to Amazon. Amazon and its dodgy warehouse business, workers there, and at U.S. food delivery, Instacart in the U.S., and Italian workers at Amazon have walked out. U.S. senators have also written to Amazon's boss, Bezos. The company said they are taking extra precautions, which many of the workers said they had not. Now, the walkout was on a Monday. In Italy, the company said it reduced deliveries since the 22nd of March. However, union officials say workers need access to better protection, masks and gloves, sanitizers, etc. The company, which looks to hire 100,000 additional workers in the U.S. to help address the surge in orders. They also boosted by, $2 an hour, £2 in the U.S. And all of these operations, including the food stores, workers are working overtime or not getting time off. The firms earlier faced a strike by workers in France and Italy, has been hit by legal complaints over issues in Spain. That's according to the Global Alliance of Unions coordinated by the UNI Global Union. So the unions are involved in this strike. Instacart was organized by Instacart Shoppers and Gig Workers Collective, which accused the company of profiteering by putting people making deliveries in direct harm. People working for Instacart did not have masks, nor gloves, nor sanitizers. The organization said the firm should provide protective gear, hazard pay, extended pay for those unable to work because of the virus. It's an extraordinary time in history, and as shoppers, those of us who are able to and have the means to protect ourselves and not want to help those in our community by delivering groceries and supplies, the organization wrote. But with Instacart neglecting basic well-being of 150,000 drivers out there, despite the threat of a walkout, Instacart on Monday said it had been absolutely no impact on its operation. These are always statements made by firms, and in fact, we'll investigate this more. On Sunday, after the call strike, Instacart said it was working with manufacturers to provide its own hand sanitizer, and changing its tip policy. It had earlier said it would pay bonuses, provide 14 days of sick leave for its shoppers or part-time workers diagnosed with the COVID virus. Well, that is happening in the U.S. by national legislation, so they don't need to do that. We are immensely grateful to the entire shopping community. Well, we'll leave that as it is. These lies circulate from time to time. But what has happened in the U.S., because of the work of Bernie Sanders and others, we now see sick leave as entering the political lexicon of the U.S. There will no doubt be legislation in Congress, and it should be at this time, to make the sick leave a national program and enshrine it in legislation. Also, we have to look at the national income. That's part of the $1,200 we have now that is being distributed to citizens, additional unemployment benefits, etc. Many of these things out there. The Democrats are working on another one of these stimulus type programs, and they should address that. They should. There's also evidently some moves to extend that $1,200 to people that are disabled, and there's some litigation in that field that people are on these basic programs, SSI, etc., to extend the money to them, and this should be done. Also, seniors, no doubt about it, should be covered, and those are some adjustments that they are there's talk of doing. The Trump administration so far, and the Republicans in various states' legislatures, are still talking of a pipe dream of tax relief for so-called small businesses. Tax relief will not, I can tell you as an economist, will not help in this situation. A business has to be in business to get any type of tax relief after the pandemic, which we're talking 2021. We're looking now towards peak, and in many places in the next few weeks of April, and it's not an April Fool's joke, we'll go into peak in some of these areas. I have more understanding of what's happened in Wuhan. They went through peak, and now they're starting, this is in China, they're starting to open up some things. The plants are going back to work. but under a managed situation. So, for instance, in the U.S., if you peak in later April, you still have in May where you're in a transition period. So now Trump says, well, maybe June. Well, that would depend, obviously, on areas and how successful it is happening there. And we didn't do the roundup, but in places like New Orleans, in Michigan, in Detroit, that already had a shabby economy there. A lot of people desperate, not even clean drinking water. Now they're arguing in Detroit, and this doesn't make any sense, about whether to shut off water in a pandemic. So a lot of these old dodgy presses, subhuman presses of places like Detroit have to go out the window. In fact, Detroit's so hard hit, the police chief himself is quarantined, and many of the police department types are themselves falling to the COVID-19 virus. So this has opened up the system, and there has to be public discussion more than just these little reality TV shows from the White House. I guess now they move to the Rose Garden every day. And much of the media, I was listening to a call-in program on NPR, was a disgrace. The information itself was so candy-coated and out of line, it was pathetic. So you have to really watch where you're getting your news, even if, say, the public radio or even somewhat to the BBC. A lot of that is slanted against China, a lot of red baiting there, a lot of xenophobia, all thrown in. And by and large, they're not talking about the work that China has done and is doing in Italy. Italy put out a call to the EU nations, and nobody showed up. China did, in fact, show up, and they're talking, well, some of the tests didn't work, but, well, the tests in this country didn't work either. So a lot of this will pan out as we get more of the historical movement there, but first, the pandemic has to be stopped in its tracks. Let's go now to a tribute to the Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowery. He was a leader of the civil rights movement. He founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he gave the benediction at the inauguration of Barack Obama. He died, and he was 98 years old. This is the New York Times obituary here. The Reverend Dr. Joseph E. Lowery was a lieutenant to the Dr. Martin Luther King, who helped organize pivotal moments in the civil rights movement, the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. He gave the benediction there, and more than a half century later, died on Friday at his home in Atlanta, Georgia. Even before Rosa Parks refused to give her seat on a Montgomery bus that was on the 1st of December 1955, Dr. Lowery had successfully campaigned to integrate buses in Mobile, Alabama, where he was a young Methodist minister. After his Parks action, he ordered with Dr. King and other Alabama ministers to oversee a 381-day boycott of Montgomery's segregated bus system. In November of 1956, the Supreme Court ended racial segregation on buses in Montgomery and by extension everywhere else. Dr. Lowery was at Dr. King's side almost until the day of his assassination. That was in April, and we have to always remember that day of 1968. At Dr. King's request, he presented demands of young voting rights marchers from Selma, Alabama to Governor Wallace in 1965. Dr. Lowery also helped found the Southern Leadership Conference, Dr. King's signature organization, led it for 20 years, 1977, 1997. When Dr. King gathered with top aides the day before his death, it was Dr. Lowery who ended the meeting by saying, "The Holy Spirit is in this room." Dr. Laurie marched in countless demonstrations and was repeatedly arrested and was once shot at by the KKK. As the head of SLC, he promoted economic empowerment for African Americans, saying they must control the cash register of the lunch counter they integrated. He became known as the Dean of the Civil Rights Movement. David Garrett, the author of Beaming the Cross, Martin Luther King Jr. Southern Leadership Conference, 1986, said in the interview for his obituary in 2010 that Dr. Laurie was the most prominent survivor of the movement, the human and symbolic link going all the way back. Dr. Laurie earned a reputation as a powerful speaker in the tradition of the African church, lacing his oratory with wit and rhyme. His oratory raised heckles in 2006 when speaking at the funeral of the widow Coretta Scott King with President G.W. Bush in attendance. He accused the Bush administration of spending on war while ignoring domestic needs. We know now there is no weapon of mass destruction over there, Dr. Laurie said, alluding to Iraq. But Coretta knew, and we know that there are weapons of misdirection right down here. Some criticized his prayer at President Obama's inauguration, which borrowed from Big Bill Bosey's song Black, Brown, and White Blues. Help us work for the day when black will not be asked to get back. This is very famous. He said this. He said, when brown can stick around, when yellow will be mellow, when the red man can get ahead, man, white embrace what is right. President Obama bowed his head and broke into a broad smile. Later that year, he awarded the President's Medal of Freedom. Joseph Eccles Laurie was born the 6th of October, 1921 in Huntsville, Alabama, where his father owned a pool hall and other properties. Dr. Laurie often recalled a day a police officer jabbed him in the stomach with a nightstick when he was 11 years old. Using a racial epithet, the officer said, "Don't you see a white man coming in the door?" Laurie said he ran home to get his father's gun, but his father took it away from him and spanked him. When his father complained to the police chief, said that there was nothing he could do, explaining, "If I fire him, I hire another one, and that'll do the same damn thing." The incident planted a seed in me, Dr. Laurie told Emerge magazine in 1998. It's a wonder I didn't make me hate. His family sent him to Chicago to live with relatives, but he returned to Huntsville to finish high school. I didn't know that. He attended at several colleges, including Payne College, Augustina, Georgia, where he studied sociology. He then worked for an African newspaper in Birmingham, where he reported on racial violence. In Birmingham, he met Ellen Gibson, a minister's daughter whom he married in 1947. In 1999, she founded a nonprofit SLC, Women for Women's Organization Movement for Equality Now, which advocated for disadvantaged women and children. She died in 2013. He survived, including 2 daughters. Feeling called to preach, he enrolled in the Payne Theological Seminary in Wilberforce, Ohio. He was ordained in the Methodist Church and was assigned to Warren Street United Methodist Church in Mobile. He joined the Mobile chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. After Alabama outlawed the organization, that was in 1955, he helped form an independent group, the Alabama Civil Affairs Association, and became its president. After a one-day boycott of Mobile buses, the group was able to get rid of the rule that African Americans must give up seats to European passengers. We changed the word white to European, although they still have to board the bus at the back. Dr. Laurie then joined Dr. King and two other ministers, Ralph Abernathy and Fred Shuttlesworth, in leading the boycott. Dr. Laurie figured in a momentous Supreme Court decision in 1964, New York Times Company versus Sullivan. He was one of 4 African-American ministers mentioned in the advertisement published by the Times soliciting donations to help defend Dr. King against a perjury indictment in Alabama. L.B. Sullivan, a commissioner of Montgomery County, Alabama, and others, contended that they had been liable by the ad. There incidentally had been numerous libel suits around. The Alabama State Court agreed, levying $500,000 judgment against them. The Times and the minister's car and other personal property were seized. But in a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court reversed the state court ruling, saying in a statement that the ad had not been made with deliberate malice. This was a libel case, and the malice was necessary to prove a libel against a public official. The ruling allowed the press to report more freely about civil rights and other subjects without fear of legal action. For years, Dr. Laurie faced danger as he continued his civil rights struggle across the South and beyond. Only his sudden decision to take a train home from Nashville saved him from a bomb that was detonated in his Birmingham hotel room in 1963. In 1979, he defied a Klan death threat and marched for leniency for a mentally disabled African American who was accused of raping 2 European women in Decatur, Georgia. Bullets buzzed over his head. Dr. Laurie also almost expressed a sense of humor. He complained of not being able to take up a collection after his prayer at President Obama's inaugural, and he once said he wished Dr. King's birthday was a warmer month than in January, since he always seemed to be invited to speak in cold weather. He succeeded Dr. Abernathy as the president of SCLC in 1977. At the time when the membership finances and enthusiasm had plummeted, he revived the group, led a 2,700-mile pilgrimage to Washington through 5 states to help win a renewal of the Voters' Rights Act of 1965 in 1982. Separately pushed businesses to hire more African Americans. He also supported gay rights, including marriage equality, and campaigned to end capital punishment by lethal injection. In an interview with the Philadelphia Inquirer at the time of his retirement, that was in 1997, Dr. Laurie said he had succeeded in his principal goal of maintaining Dr. King's organization as a prophetic voice crying in the wilderness. Well, we remember Dr. Laurie here. He was 98 years old, and may he rest in peace there. And as we leave out of here on the darker side of history, some moron in a mega church by the name of Pastor Rodney Howard Brown. He was at the river at Tampa Bay Church. He had been warned. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous tip that the pastor would planned to hold services on Sunday in violation of an order there for people to stay home and limit gatherings during the coronavirus. The Sheriff's Office said they warned church lawyers on Friday and Sunday about the dangerous environment they were creating for their members, and they should be sued. In other words, Howard Brown, the self-proclaimed Holy Ghost bartender, and he's also a conspiracist for COVID-19 conspiracy theories, ignored the warning. He held 2 large services there. This is Tampa Bay Times. Incidentally, the church live streamed the morning main event on its Facebook page, and the congregants were shoulder to shoulder while the band played. That's why Howard Brown was arrested on a Monday of a misdemeanor charge of violating unlawful assembly and violating quarantine orders. Because of his reckless disregard of public safety, after repeatedly requests and warnings, I worked with our state's attorney to obtain a warrant. So they did arrest the Dodgy here. Christopher and Warren held a news conference Monday announcing the charges against the pastor who was in custody. That day, the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases across Florida passed 2,700. And Warren then took the lectern and quoted the Bible. I remain the good pastor of Mark 12:31, which says there is no more important command than to love thy neighbor as thyself. Warren said loving your neighbor is to protect them, not jeopardize their health by exposing them to a deadly virus. So I suppose a little bit of scripture there. He was arrested at his home in Hernando County and booked into the county jail. And 40 minutes later, he posted a $500 bond. He'll have to appear in court in Hillsborough County to answer the charge, and no date has been set. He's originally from South Africa, where at the age 5, he said he committed his life to Christ. Evidently, he and his family settled in the Bay Area, buying a house in the gated Tampa community of Corey Lake's Owls. He quickly gained fame for high-energy productions and holy laughter of his congregation who danced while in the Owls. In recent years, he joined the evangelical leaders who met with DJ Trump and laid hands on him. Oh boy. Pastor also promulgated many right-wing conspiracy theories. There, most recently in a sermon, he said the Phantom Plague created by the Chinese also was something planned at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, according to Right Wing Watch. So again, we have the conspiracy theories at the center of this whole thing is represented by another right-wing organization, the Liberty Council, which the Southern Poverty Law Center says promotes discrimination against LGBTQ community. In a statement issued after his arrest, the Liberty Council said the church enforces 6-foot that wore gloves and spent $100,000 on a hospital-grade purification system. Anyway, whether they did or they didn't, contrary to the sheriff, Howard Brown was reckless action there, and so are discriminating against religious and church gatherings. That's according to the Liberty Council founder Stiver. Right Wing Watch on the 27th of March posted a video explaining that the $100,000 system. Anyway, so they have a $100,000 system here. State laws be ordered to be enforced as a second-degree misdemeanor, punishable by 60 days in jail. They should give them every bit of that, and a maximum only $500. He issued Howard Brown addressed the issue in a 3.5-hour live stream Sunday morning, which started with nearly an hour of music performed by the church band. Anyway, more foolishness here. And later he, this is from the playbook here, tweeted that the news organization was stirring up, the news media, stirring up religious bigotry and hate, and claimed the church was shot at Sunday night. The claim is unfounded, the sheriff's spokesman said. State released March 8th. Church leaders signaled they consider the church as an essential service, like police, fire department, and hospital. Oh boy. So this just shows you how far these dodgy operators can go. To Drivers Point Home, Warren and Chronister have Bishop Thomas Scott, 34th Street Church of God in Tampa Talk Church had temporarily halted service at Sanctuary. Instead, they just live streamed theirs. The Bible instructs us to obey the law of the land, Scott said. So that's Bishop Thomas Scott. Anyway, this is from the Tampa Bay Times, and it's time for us to move along also here. This is Boston Red and the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth on let's see, where are we here? It's easy to get confused where you are day to day around this place. On the 31st of March, 2020. Good day. And incidentally, you can catch us where you get your social media, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Streaka, and if you're in Spain, or if you're in Italy, or anywhere in Europe, you can catch us via Stitcher. They have a broadcast unit, Spreaker, excuse me. They have a broadcast unit in Barcelona. They were out of Barcelona, and they are fluent in Italian. They are now in San Francisco, incidentally.